Welcome back to this 23rd episode of RICO Busters. The story spotlighted today offers to vindicate former University of Michigan professor Dr. Bill Kauffman in his blowing the whistle well over a decade ago about the University of Michigan and the then newly elected Michigan Governor Rick Snyder creating an issue of national security to Americans by providing what is called dual-use technology to communist China. Thus, the title of this documentary is The Money Behind the Grid of Spy-Enabling Technology, in which case Rick Snyder is the subject of this expose. The case 10 years ago was that, being a top military advisor and the devoted patriot of the United States that he was, Dr. Kauffman was being retaliated against professionally and personally, being regarded by the University of Michigan regents and the former university President Mary Sue Coleman more as an aged and disgruntled kook rather than an aerospace engineer and explosives expert, university professor, and Cold War negotiator for the United States relations with Russia that he otherwise had long been. It was back then that Dr. Kauffman, along with another former University of Michigan professor, Dr. Doug Smith, had come to me for an interview on the matter of exactly how Michigan Governor Rick Snyder and the University of Michigan were privately profiting at the taxpayers' expense from the sharing of dual-use technology that could be used by the Socialist Nation, the People's Republic of China, against our own servicemen and women in the military. 10 years ago, about this time, there was action in the Pacific off the coast of California, exposing potential threats to the United States by China. The concerns exposed by Dr. Kauffman and Dr. Smith were that both Rick Snyder and the University of Michigan were privately profiteering at the cost of safety for all other Americans. This follow-up documentary is being produced in early 2018 because of a recent article out of Washington, D.C. revealing that fully 10 years after I had publicly released my interview with Dr. Bill Kauffman, Washington is finally taking steps to reduce the presence of the very Chinese companies that were spotlighted in my documentary, having links to the money and business operations of Rick Snyder, being Huawei and ZTE. Here is the 10-minute summary of that over 2-hour televised interview that I did in 2010.
为什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？列颠帝国，美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重经济衰退。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
Power Corrupts Again, the program that spotlights corporate, government, and judicial corruption. Welcome back to Power Corrupts Again. I'm David Scheid, here with Dr. Bill Kauffman and Dr. Doug Smith. I am David Scheid, and I'm in the studio with Dr. William Kauffman and Dr. Doug Smith, both retired University of Michigan Smith is a former professor of pathology at the University of Michigan. Again, and I'm David Scheid, here interviewing former University of Michigan professor Bill Kauffman and Doug Smith, who have decided to take a clear stand as whistleblowers on the topic of China and its threat to the United States national security through espionage, intelligence, and what amounts to the selling out of America by the corporate elite.
Basically, our nation is on the verge of economic and military failure. The theft of almost everything of value from our nation by the Chinese, the mainland Chinese, the People's Republic of China, by large numbers of Chinese students, and also people who are employed in America, what we call sleeper agents. They've been here for a long time, and they've carefully been accumulating things that their nation needs in order to become a superpower.
The result has been a self-serving sellout of secret industrial technology and American jobs by the university president and administrative board of regents at the University of Michigan.
They have stolen a lot of good military technology. that hurts us. Let's just go down the list of technologies that they've stolen, okay, from the University of Michigan. Okay, we get rocket and launch vehicle technology, nuclear weapons and thermonuclear weapons technology, reentry vehicle technology, satellite technology, cruise missile technologies. And the thing that really got me to start writing memos at the University of Michigan and eventually to take early retirement was their attempted theft of Trident missile technology. So this was really the thing that got me upset and got me in trouble. You know, my office was subsequently moved into the equivalent of a broom closet because I did this. And all my books were mixed up and models were damaged, etc., as retribution for speaking out.
For the American corporate elite, this is business as usual, allowing Chinese to steal our national trade and security secrets without any intervention whatsoever from our government. In fact, the so-called revolving door between government and corporate enterprises shows us that government officials themselves are instrumentally participating in this rush to greed and the undermining of our national security interests. Let's take the newly elected Michigan governor, for example. We had some discussion about how the entrepreneurial ventures of our new Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, a graduate of the University of Michigan, fits into all this with his investment company, Ardesta. Rick Snyder was co-founder of a company, Disera, which is helping Chinese companies to compete globally. Using state-of-the-art technology developed at the University of Michigan, Rick Snyder is helping the Chinese to win market share using venture capital from another company that he co-founded, Ardesta, LLC.
These precision-guided munitions, in which these components go, have totally revolutionized warfare. You can almost state it, you know, one bomb, one hit on where you want it. It's not like carpet bombing where maybe one of them will hit it out of 1,000.
Right.
But warfare has truly changed.
These dual-use technologies require an export license, and we talked before that has to come from the Department of Commerce. Okay. Well, we've tried to find out whether or not his company, Disera, actually applied for and was granted a license to send that technology to China. All they'll tell us is that they've followed all U.S. laws, but they won't produce a license, and they won't say that they have a license.
I should bring attention to another of Rick Snyder's private business ventures. It is that his investment firm, Ardesta, is a major investor in another communications tech firm called NeoPhotonics, an optical network company at the forefront of the next generation of wireless communications. What is significant to note about this alliance is that NeoPhotonics is a major supplier to Huawei Technologies and ZTE, two Chinese companies widely regarded as two high-tech espionage fronts for the People's Liberation Army of Communist China. Here is a letter expressing the concerns of at least 8 senators about the Chinese company Huawei, copied to the Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, the Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano, and the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The letter affirms, and I quote, that Chinese from Huawei Technologies is bidding to supply equipment to Sprint Nextel, and that lawyers retained by the company are currently working with the Treasury Department to allow it to operate in the United States. The letter continues to state that Huawei's position as a supplier of Sprint Nextel could create substantial risk for the United States companies and possibly undermine U.S. national security. I guess it dawned on some in Washington that we should be concerned if the equipment made by the Chinese companies of Huawei and ZTE were installed across America's cell phone grid, which could secretly be programmed for spying on all Americans. What is curious about this letter is that it never mentions that the Republican governor, Rick Snyder, runs the company financing NeoPhotonics, and that he therefore is the money behind the technology this international partnership of companies may be trying to use to spy on the people of the United States. Oh, I hate lying politicians, especially those who lie by certain omissions.
If you take, for example, University of Michigan, will train their scientists on how to avoid import-export restrictions. And so the University of Michigan uses a loophole that's for what they call fundamental research. So if what you're discovering can be considered fundamental research, then you don't have to get an import or export permit. But the same technologies that they're calling fundamental research, they're putting patents on, and they're doing startup companies. And so how is that now a fundamental research?
And there's another interesting situation at the University of Michigan in that the current chief scientist of the U.S. Air Force was a professor at the University of Michigan, Werner Dahm. Mm-hmm. And during his tenure at the University of Michigan, he had a very close relationship with what we call the Dean for China, Jun Ni, who basically runs the Chinese campuses. They had a joint high-tech firm, spin-off firm. And one of the things that Doug brought up is these beltway type firms where, you have entanglements and commercialization, and who knows where this basic research ends up. It can end up in a position, that can hurt us. And back in the Cold War days, if I met a Russian at a meeting, I had to come back and fill out a report, who it was, what we talked about, da-da-da-da. And I find it very peculiar that we have a chief scientist of the Air Force who had a very intimate business relation with a Chinese national who spends a great deal of time in China right now. So there's a serious problem here that our experts in Washington don't seem to want to address. And I like the way that Donald Trump put it in one of the morning talk shows. He says, we don't have our first team in. It's time that we get our first team in, and the best minds available who have America's interests at heart and not their own financial interests.
The two things that they couldn't build themselves were a reliable jet engine and avionics. And what is General Electric going to be giving them? The jet engines and the avionics.
Well, as far as I've heard, General Electric has a long history of feeding both sides, going all the way back to World War II.
Where's the oversight here? Want to know something? There's not any. And that was precisely Dr. Kauffman's point in 2010 when I met him. And what I came to find out was the point that he was trying to make for the entirety of the decade prior to that. Here's a reprint of an article in the 2007 edition of the Manufacturing and Technology News magazine. In the article, the former tenured University of Michigan aeronautics engineer professor explained that the modus operandi of the U of M regents and the former university president Mary Sue Coleman was to host Chinese delegations of undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral students by not only offering these foreign nationals insight, knowledge, and know-how of the state-of-the-art technology developed by the university, which could be used for precision bombing by the Chinese against the United States and its allies, but also placing these Chinese nationals ahead of local Michigan students whose families are bankrolling this public university by filling faculty positions, scholarship and fellowship opportunities, internships, and other employment opportunities which otherwise might go to Americans. All of this was particularly pressing upon Dr. Kauffman as a native-born American who had, as the article put it, worked his way through college in a machine shop and receiving his Ph.D. in aeronautics. What the contemporary liberal employers at the university did not seem to understand when retaliating against Dr. Kauffman by having him arrested by campus police, by trying to revoke his tenure, and by canceling all of his core classes in his specialty areas, was that Kauffman's views of the world had come from his direct experiences and utilization by the United States Air Force during the Cold War period when the U.S. guarded its technology from the Soviet Union. This is not to say that Dr. Kauffman, nor I for that matter, hold prejudicial biases against the Chinese people. On the contrary, as writer and producer of this video in 2018 and the preceding video in 2010, I hold an affinity for Asian people and a degree from a first-tier university in East Asian language and culture. Dr. Kauffman certainly had the right to question what Rick Snyder and the University of Michigan and other universities were doing in sharing with the representatives of Communist China what journalist Vince Wade stated was the super in technology that made the United States a superpower in both military and economic strength. In the Manufacturing and Technology News article, Kauffman referred to the Pentagon's 2000 military threat report to support his contention that real threats to Americans exist. In fact, in 2010, when I, David Scheid, interviewed Dr. Bill Kauffman and Dr. Doug Smith, the Chinese were stealing copyrighted and patented items for their own economic purposes in China. They were maliciously hacking into American businesses and governments through cyber channels, causing costly temporary shutdowns and other impediments to their business functioning. And, as mentioned already, the Chinese were flexing their newly found military might by rocket fire in the Pacific and by providing sneak peeks at their new stealth fighter jet prototype. 2 years after Dr. Kauffman's story was aired on Michigan Public Television and subsequently posted on the internet, Michigan Congressman Mike Rogers and the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence in Washington, D.C., published an investigative report on the United States national security risk, presented by the Chinese telecommunications companies of Huawei and DTE. This report, like the Pentagon's 2007 military threat report, did not exactly paint the picture of these Chinese companies as being nice guys. Instead, the company's managements were uncooperative and non-transparent. This is not at all unlike how Drs. Kauffman and Smith reported Rick Snyder and the University of Michigan to be regarding their private patenting and profiteering from technology developed at the Michigan taxpayers' expense. So let's consider briefly how since 2010, both the state of Michigan and the United States have gone further to become a living hell in a handbasket for the American people. Because nobody stopped Rick Snyder in 2010, he has gone forth to ride roughshod over lies and finger-pointing about who's at fault in the Flint water crisis. Now, how can it be that anyone in Michigan could have a water crisis when the 3/4 of the entire state is surrounded by the largest reservoir of fresh water known to the world? This could happen only in the corrupt corporate state of Michigan. Similarly, the national government, otherwise known as a federal corporation, is embroiled in a secret society and a cover-up of crimes occurring at the very highest levels of the corporate United States, as created under at least the last 2 Republican and Democratic presidential administrations. The self-interested partisan deals run rampant throughout D.C., with states being complicit under the auspices and principles of cooperative federalism. If you think we have checks and balances either within or without the state and federal governments, think again. This is a free-for-all grab for power and an orchestrated circus for the fake mainstream media to capitalize on in mesmerizing the public and detracting from the fact that what we have long been seeing are treasonous crimes against the people of this nation. So with the hope that I have in some humbled way vindicated Dr. William Kauffman and brought some semblance of respect back to the stand he was taking so many years ago on all of our behalves, I say, rest in peace, Bill. Your life was both honorable and memorably patriotic.